Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation on clean cooking. I am delighted so many of you are joining us today to celebrate 10 years of impact on this critically important issue. My name is Dymphna van der Land and I am the CEO of the Clean Cooking Alliance. Before we get started in our conversation with our two distinguished guests, I thought I would provide a little bit of background for those of you who are less familiar with this topic. It is hard to imagine in this day and age where we have space tourism, artificial intelligence, and remote meetings such as the one that we're partaking in today, and yet half of the world's population still cooks over polluting open fires using solid fuels. Millions of people across the world still cook as our ancestors did centuries ago, using open fuels or open fires and inhaling toxic smoke, filling their lungs and polluting the air. This is unacceptable. The impacts of cooking this way are significant and touch all of us. The World Health Organization has estimated that about 4 million people die prematurely every year from cooking this way. Using open fires produces huge amounts of climate gases. About half of the world's black carbon emissions come from cooking this way. Women and girls spend hours cooking and collecting fuels, time they could have spent on other activities. And the unsustainable use of fuels leads to deforestation and environmental degradation. As I said, this is unacceptable, and this is where clean cooking comes in. We envision a world where no one's life is limited by how they cook. We envision a world where homes are no longer filled with toxic fuels and toxic fumes. We envision a world where children are able to go to school because they don't have to collect firewood. About a decade ago, a global movement started to do just this. Through our work, we are enabling hundreds of millions of families to use clean cooking solutions, stoves, appliances, fuels, just like we do in our own kitchens every single day. The benefits of this transition are multiple and really significant. By using clean cooking solutions, we improve lives, we improve air quality, we protect our environment, and we empower women around the world. I am honored today to be joined by two visionary leaders who were fundamental in the establishment of this global movement. First, let me introduce Secretary Clinton. As you all know, Secretary Clinton is a former Secretary of State from the United States. She has been a really tireless advocate for social justice and social issues, including clean cooking. And she was fundamental in the establishment of the Clean Cooking Alliance about, as we were just talking, about 11 years ago now. Secondly, I'm really honored to introduce Wanjira Mathai, who's the Vice President and Regional Director of Africa for the World Resources Institute. Wanjira is also the chair of the Wanjira Mathai Foundation, as well as the former chair of the Green Belt Movement in Kenya. She also has been a tireless advocate for social and environmental change. I am personally just so honored to be with both of you. You have inspired my career and continue to motivate me every single day to do this important work with the Clean Cooking Alliance. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Secretary Clinton and Wanjira. We will spend as much time as we possibly can really looking forward, which I think is important. It's a really important decade this year. And so the last 10 years have had significant impact and we're celebrating that. But we also want to start thinking about what else can we do collectively to really address this issue at the scale that's required. But before we do that, I always feel it's important to acknowledge what has been done before and how things started, because it's easy, relatively speaking, for me to do the good work that my team does, but it's only because of all the good work that has been done by others before us. And so I want to start with you, Secretary Clinton, if that's okay. I can envision that 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when you started to bring this issue to the attention of global leaders, business leaders, scientists, there may have been some resistance and some reluctance to engage on this issue. Can you share a little bit with us what those challenges were and why you decided to pursue despite some of these challenges?
Well, first, thank you, Dymphna, for hosting us today and for your leadership of the Clean Cooking Alliance. I am grateful to you for, keeping this momentum going. And it's always a pleasure to see my longtime friend and colleague, Wanjira. So I'm really pleased to be part of this. Let's go back 11 years. And I think now it's perhaps hard to appreciate what a lightning bolt it was for me and those with whom I worked to realize that there was something we could do that would be good for climate change, good for health, good for women's empowerment, and it had to do with the most basic activity of life, namely cooking. It was brought to my attention when I was Secretary of State that, as you just said, Dymphna, the amount of damage done by cooking over open fires, largely using solid fuels, to the health of primarily women and children. In fact, respiratory ailments were in the top 5 causes of global deaths that were directly related to the consequences of such cooking. That it was a major emitter of gases that were problematic for the climate, for the immediate environment because of the pollutants that were in the air. And it was a huge time commitment by women and children, again, to gather fuel to be able to make a meal for the family. So when we came forward with our interest in this, there was already some work being done. It wasn't really at global scale yet, but there were scientists, advocates, some decision makers, certainly people who were aware of the health consequences who had been trying to gather attention for us to address this. And because we were able to convince within my own government, not just the State Department, but USAID, the Environmental Protection Agency, to really elevate this issue, we were then able to work with like-minded, interested governments and not-for-profits and advocates to try to put together a global response. And the final thing I'll say as just an introduction is there was pushback. You referred to that. There were people who are very well-meaning and quite intent upon raising living standards, raising health standards, who did not see it as a big problem, who questioned the science, who raised all kinds of skepticism about why the United States government would be making this a high priority. But we kept working on it. We kept pushing back, and we were able to get a united front and then take that message to governments. And there were some very receptive governments and policymakers who looked at the same data, had the same, almost revelation that this is something that is really good on so many fronts and joined in our efforts.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And it'd be really interesting when we go a little bit further in our conversation, Secretary Clinton, because we see the same thing happening again in the United States government. So it's really good to see that sort of intra-government coordination re-emerging as a theme, which is critically important for issues like clean cooking. Wanjira, a little bit of the same question for you. You have been working on this for decades, really focused on environmental protection and making sure that women are empowered to have their voices heard as they're thinking about these issues. So can you share a little bit with us and with the audience about how that started and really what some of the challenges were that you overcame?
Absolutely. And also, joining Secretary Clinton, such a pleasure, a privilege, because actually, to be honest, the clean cooking issue as a global issue was really introduced to me by her. She was launching the Clean Cooking Alliance 11 years ago. I grew up in Kenya all my life, in many ways, sitting around these fires. I was in my grandmother's house every Easter or every Christmas, and we would sit around these fires. They were They warmed the house. They were the source of ambient temperature warming, but also that's where we cooked. We roasted potatoes in them. We roasted bananas. It never really occurred to me that it was dangerous in the way that I was now starting to hear. And so it's such an important point that so many of us who grew up in Africa, or who grew up in Asia, who grew up in these circumstances. It is almost its norm. We cook like this. We live in these circumstances. And until it's pointed out that there is some connection to the indoor air pollution, to the number of children dying early, to the number of pneumonia cases, you don't quite appreciate it. So it really was an important opening that it became this global call to action. And so it wasn't until I was leading W Power as the Partnership for Women's Entrepreneurship that I realized it is actually quite prolific. It's not a small number. That in Kenya, 90% of Kenyans are cooking using biomass energy. That surprised me. I thought it was a marginal number. And so it was only then that I realized the scale of it. And at the same time, I started to appreciate the danger of it. And then, of course, we started to look at what are some of the alternatives. Why is it so compelling? That's a really important question. Why is cooking on open fire so compelling? And how can we introduce or transition from this in a way that doesn't rob people of what they actually love about it? There's a way there's certain preferences people have. And so I loved W Power because it was about looking closely at how do we do this in a way that's dignifying, in a way that maintains what women love about cooking around these fires, the solidarity, the warmth, the multiple flavors that come out of cooking like this. And that we don't just come and say, hey, get rid of this, and here's something I brought for you to use. So it was a very thoughtful movement that was being set up that I really, really appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely, Wanjira. And I think the notion that the solutions that are brought to the families and the communities that we're reaching have to be focused on the user. And to assume that we know what it is that they want is the wrong assumption. And so the fundamental part, I think, of the Clean Cooking Alliance and how we think about this is it has to be user-centered. And the solutions that are provided have to be focused on the user. Because if not for that, then the skill is never going to be achieved. And so my other question for you, Secretary Clinton, is really on the fact that you advocated to use a market-based approach, which is also grounded in like the solutions have to be for the users and need to be really commercially driven as well, because otherwise we're not going to reach that skill. And so at that time, that was quite a unique approach. Can you share a little bit more about what made you decide to really push for that market-based approach for clean cooking specifically?
Oh, sure. And I just wanted to add to the very important point Wanjira made was this has to be culturally educated. You know, just as she said, 90% of Kenyans are using open fire cooking. The way that they do it in Kenya may not be the way they do it in rural India or the way that they do it in, a small village in China or Indonesia. I mean, we have to be really aware of what the, families and the women in those families want from that experience. When you think about this movement, and we began trying to figure out what do we do. I mean, it's a huge problem. I mean, you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions, probably billions of people who cook this way, and there's no one size fits all. So we wanted to encourage a market-based approach because we thought the market in Kenya would be different than the market in China. And so one of the things that I've seen over the course of the last 11 years in my travels is the different kinds of models that have been created by inventors, by, a lot of people who understand there could be a market and are trying to help fill it, because it all looks different. I remember going to an exhibit in China when I raised this issue with them and encouraged them to take it on. And they had about 24 different models for different climates, for different altitudes, for different kinds of fuel. And I think that is the most lasting approach. Now, clearly, the cost has to be as low as possible. And very often there will have to be some kind of subsidy or long-term payment plan for a family to afford both the device and the fuel. So this turned out to be a complicated, diverse problem that we had to address and try to make it as localized as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that the Clean Cooking Alliance is pursuing as a new initiative is this user insight lab that will also really build on the availability of data. And as all of we know, like there's so much more data available now and really innovative ways and increasingly cheaper ways to actually collect the data and use that to make informed decisions about solutions that are appropriate. So one of the new initiatives that the Alliance will launch soon is really focused on the User Insight Lab because of all the things that both of you were just illustrating as well. If it's okay with both of you, I would suggest we move on a little bit to talk about the impact that actually has been achieved since Secretary Clinton and you, Wanjira, started really focusing on this issue about 11 years ago. And what a journey it has been. Ups and downs, undoubtedly, but that's part of what makes this work really fascinating and rewarding as well. And so I'm sure you've seen the recent numbers from the World Health Organization, as well as from CCA's, our own site that really focuses on the 10 years of impact. Well over 400 million people who now have access to clean cooking, more than 4.6 million lives saved, massive reductions in harmful climate gases, and countless women and girls who've been empowered through training, jobs, plus the gift of extra hours and extra time that they can spend on other things. And then combined with that, significant economic benefits that have been delivered to families, communities, and governments across the world. And so, Secretary Clinton, we've come a long way since 2010. What is it like to see for you, to see this impact and the results of your work that together with so many others really is coming to fruition?
Well, those statistics are truly inspiring. As you say, Dymphna, over 400 million people have gained access to clean cooking. And the statistic about the lives saved, 4.6 million from the harmful health effects attributed to traditional household air pollution, is especially pertinent as we come out of this pandemic, because 4.6 million people is about the number we've lost globally in the pandemic. And we were having a silent pandemic of people getting sick and dying from indoor air pollution, from breathing the particulates over open fires, both indoors and outdoors as they cooked or sat around the fire. So I think it puts into perspective what an accomplishment it has been to save those lives over this period of time. And something I'd love for Wanjira to talk about, because she and her mother have been such champions of this. There's also the whole question of deforestation, which we haven't mentioned, because most people, most women who are going out looking for fuel are looking for twigs. They're looking for some kind of tree mass that they can then transport. Obviously, they can use dung, they use other biomass, but a lot of the deforestation that has gone on has certainly been in part contributed to by people looking for fuel to start the fires to feed their families. And the fact that in addition to the 400 million now having access to clean cooking, and the 4.6 million lives that have been saved, probably a couple, many millions of trees have been saved as well. So there's so much positive outcome already. And I think from Wanjira's perspective, being on the ground in Kenya and across Africa with all the work that she's done, she can see firsthand those results.
Wanjira?
Absolutely. Such a good point, Secretary Clinton, on the deforestation. I'm always struck by the fact that it's not even about women who are picking the twigs and picking small branches. It's just the demand for charcoal that, for example, has created this market demand for charcoal that is in many ways illegitimate. An illegitimate market has just forced illegal logging to continue instead of creating opportunities, for example, for fuel farming of trees in different places, and not necessarily the cutting of indigenous trees in conservation areas to burn them for charcoal. I think that has been the real tragedy of this, because in many ways, we know how important charcoal is for many people's cooking. And even as that fuel continues to be transitioned out, in that transition period, we need to have it more organized, much better organized and legitimized, so that women can continue. They are the real custodians of seeds, and they would continue to grow these trees, but not in conservation areas. They would produce charcoal trees for those who need them, fuel trees for those who need them, and reduce the pressure on our conservation areas. That has been a true driver of deforestation. And the main reason is because it is illegitimate. And you have a lot of what we call artisanal logging that is just not necessary. It can be managed, it can be controlled. So absolutely a big driver. But I have to add, Dymphna, that I'm also really excited by those numbers. I'm particularly excited about the innovations in technology, how far we've come, where we now have options for women to consider that were never there before. I know that W Power was really important in helping spotlight the role of women. We have a lot more women involved, not only as users of these technologies, but also in the design of the technologies, in the marketing of these technologies. And we know how important it is when women have money in their pockets. 80% of that gets plowed right back into their communities. And so important that they are part of this market system. It was a genius, I think, to create a market mechanism for this, because it just didn't exist. And it's a big success story for the Cooking Alliance, that you were able to trigger supply and demand and begin to create and innovate around that. That was a really important part of I think the first part's success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for those businesses that are really focusing on innovation, both on the technology and the business model side, and their ability to incorporate the voices of women throughout the supply chain, all the way to the end user, we see so many inspiring stories right now, and really some good progress that is being made by those companies right now. And if not for those companies, we will never get to the skill that's required to address the issue. So collectively, the whole ecosystem needs to continue to support these companies, and we're honored to be able to do so. Secretary Clinton, maybe another question for you, just on the role of government. Like, how important in those last 10 years has the role of government really been, both on the donor side, but also in Africa and Asia and South and Central America, where a lot of the work happens? What do you see has been really how they've showed up, and who are the leaders?
Well, the interesting thing about this movement, and I like to think of it as a movement because it's certainly a market, but there wouldn't be a market if there hadn't been a movement. So I think governments have key roles to play. I'm very proud that our government stepped up 11 years ago. We had a hiatus for 4 years, but we're back in the game now. And the Biden-Harris administration has made clean cooking a pillar of their climate policy, and will be advocating for this approach, along with others, obviously, at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow, Scotland later this year. But other countries, Norway has been very supportive. Canada has been supportive. The Netherlands have been supportive. They've all been encouraging through their donor programs, their policy arms, that clean cooking be a part of their climate, their health, and their women's empowerment agendas. The UK has also done some work here, and other countries have been internally focused. I said China had been, willing to begin to address this when I was Secretary of State. I visited a display of clean cook stoves in India about, a couple of years ago. I lose track of time, but a couple of years ago, and I saw the different models that they were looking at to adopt on a state-by-state basis. So government has played an absolutely crucial role. I would like to see more governments involved. I'd like to see more governments in, as you say, Central and South America, Africa, Asia, step up and join, not just in name, but in real commitment, the Clean Cooking Alliance. And it's a perfect time to do this leading up to COP26. Yeah. And maybe you could say more about that, because we want to recruit countries, we want to recruit businesses, corporations, not-for-profit groups, and advocates to be looking at what we have to urgently do to address climate change. And sometimes people at the local level, both of you know this very well, they think the problem is too big. They don't think there's anything they can do. But indeed, there is something that can be done, and clean cooking could be one of those individual actions that would make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, the recent announcement that you were referring to, Secretary Clinton, from the US government, specifically through the EPA, really focuses on exactly that. So we're fortunate enough to be able to work with countries across the world to make sure that clean cooking is really ambitiously embedded in their national determined contributions as they think about the climate impacts and their implementation plans over the next years. And so part of our work going forward is to really work with those countries on their NDCs and make sure that they are able to deliver against us, because it's, as we all know, it's sometimes easy to put ambitions into a certain commitment, but it is much more difficult to implement that and then to find the funding to actually execute against those commitments. And so the Clean Cooking Alliance is really honored to be working on something that we're calling the delivery units that will allow countries in those regions to, almost like you did 11 years ago, Secretary Clinton, have like a unit within a government whose only job it is to just focus on clean cooking, which currently does not exist. And so we're really looking to make sure that across the globe, other countries have that ability to execute their plans as well. Wanjira, the role of NGOs, you and I both work in one, obviously. And I think we increasingly see it's really good, strong leadership there from the NGO sector as well. So wondered if you could share a little bit about your observations around specifically NGOs' roles as it relates to clean cooking.
Right. This is, as you've mentioned, an all of society. Everyone's needed, right? So I think one of the things that's exciting is perhaps what we're doing together with the Clean Cooking Alliance and launching this new Clean Cooking Explorer. WRI has, as a research organization, developed a lot of tools that can be leveraged. And the Energy Explorer is one that we're going to be trying to see if we can leverage for clean cooking. One of the things that's true about any issue, and the vaccine situation is the same, the last part is always the hardest. There is a reason we are dealing with this decade will be even harder than the last, because now we are dealing with some of the most difficult. We have to be more thoughtful. We have to be more granular about what is needed. And so the Clean Cooking Explorer is going to be part of helping us use technology like GIS and others to understand the insights, user insights, as we mentioned, and barriers to adopting clean cooking, to be able to interpret, to visualize, to look at exactly why and how and who are accessing cooking technologies, what sort of technologies, what are their preferences, what are the barriers along the supply chain. Because as you mentioned, especially with policy, you can have all the beautiful policies in the world, and you can have my head of state, President Kenyatta, will sign very happily that he supports this. But when you go and look, you find there are import barriers that prevent manufacturers from actually bringing in the necessary raw materials to produce and to keep costs low. We have to, these delivery units will be crucial in looking honestly at what the supply chains look like and trying to help bring those to check. And so we're excited that the Alliance and the WRI can begin to pioneer a tool like this, because it will bring us a little bit broader knowledge and more understanding of what's needed.
Great. No, absolutely. Thank you, Wanjira. And I cannot tell you how often the companies that we're working with will continue to remind me that what they need is a predictable policy environment. It should not change out of the blue all of a sudden. And so varying degrees of success, I think, there on how predictable those policy environments currently are for entrepreneurs who are really trying to do the hard work and are struggling to meet increase their margins. And so the predictability of that policy environment is one that we continue to say like really needs to be put forth front and center for the governments as well. If it is okay with both of you, I'll transition a little bit more towards the next decades of action. As you both know, this is an incredibly important year for clean cooking. We have the high-level dialogue on energy that is taking place in September, where lots of organizations have already been really focused on how to prepare for that high-level dialogue on energy. The first time that it's happening in decades at the UN level. So a really critical moment. We have COP26, as Secretary Clinton was already referencing earlier, where we're hoping to see increased commitments around climate as it relates to clean cooking. And so this is an opportunity for momentous progress, I think, on climate protection, on health, on the environment, on women's empowerment. And so really want to spend a little bit of time with both of you looking forward to see what else could be done to make sure that we continue this momentum, but even more importantly, actually build on it and really strengthen the movement that was started 10 years ago. And so maybe Secretary Clinton, if I can start with you, what else do you think is needed to be more effective? Because as you both have been alluding, it is a wide ecosystem with lots of players in it, and collaboration and coordination is key. But what else do you think, Secretary Clinton, could organizations like myself do to make sure that we continue the way that we're doing right now?
Well, I am going to hold up your report because I hope that everyone watching us, there's wonderful statements from both Wanjira and Dymphna in this report. It's a 2021 Clean Cooking Industry Snapshot from the Alliance. And in it, there is both an excellent analysis of where investment is currently going and a set of recommendations about how we better coordinate our approach. And I just want to refer to this because those who are interested in this issue, the work that is being done by the Clean Cooking Alliance gives us a roadmap, a path forward. So, for example, we definitely need, as we just heard, to better integrate this issue into governments. There needs to be a commitment, as Wanjira said, from literally the top down to the local level, that this will be a priority because it is such an important contribution in dealing with a lot of problems that, you know, countries and communities are facing. And so the recommendation that was just made by Dymphna that, you know, create and resource governmental clean cooking, quote, delivery units innovation, I wholly endorse because if, you know, when I found that I was doing this work 11 years ago, if we hadn't had dedicated people in the State Department pushing the rest of our government, there would have been interest. I think people, as Wanjira said, would have said, oh yeah, great idea, but there wouldn't have been the constant day-to-day effort to make sure we were doing things, that we were trying to deliver results. I also think in the private sector, and this is something the two of you know a lot about, how do we make this attractive for more inventors and companies to invest? How do we get people thinking like they're now thinking like, how do we make solar energy more portable, make it smaller, make it more efficient? Well, how do we get more people thinking about cook stoves? How do we get more businesses, more inventors? I would love to see a lot of almost like a contest, like a contest for the best, and with some, with some prizes attached for the best designs. Again, we would need like 4 or 5 winners because there's so many different conditions that clean cooking takes place in. I think also if we can get some strong statements coming out of international organizations like we got out of the WHO, because as you both know, there was debate about whether it was really a health problem, and there were people who were on both sides of the issue when I thought the data was pretty clear, but there were all kinds of questions. And then when the WHO said, no, this is a health problem that causes, chronic conditions and even death, we were able to break through. So I think we need international organizations to talk about why this is a part of climate change reactions. This is a part of ending charcoal creation. We need a much bigger global attention focused on this, and countries, businesses, and others, making it part of their commitments. Obviously, we need more financial resources. We need these markets not just to be in urban areas, but out in rural areas where most of the cooking is going on. So I think if you are really focused on what we need to do in order to hit our goals for 2030, this report gives you a good idea of where you might fit in to make a difference.
Absolutely. And a quick shout out to the team who created that report. I know, as a matter of fact, that it is one of the most valuable tools and publications that we produce right now. And lots of people in the ecosystem really refer to this tool. So a big shout out to my team who works really tirelessly on producing these reports, and we do it every year. I think that the whole suggestion, Secretary Clinton, around this whole systems approach, like really being very clear about what different roles, different parts of the ecosystem play, so that we collectively and transparently are moving forward in the right way, really led the Clean Cooking Alliance several months ago to initiate and launch this clean cooking systems strategy work, where we don't create a strategy just for us as an organization, but our intention is to create it for the whole sector. And so some of the things that I was sharing earlier, the initiatives that are coming out of that, are really being now taken up by not just us, but by multiple partners, including one that's really going to focus on the role that carbon finance plays. And I want to check with you, Wanjira, a little bit, because there is a real opportunity, I think, now to make clean cooking projects tremendously attractive for carbon financing. There are some hurdles that I think there's some noise in the system occasionally that it gets seen as like too small, too insignificant, a little bit what you've heard 11 years ago, Secretary Clinton. And so your thoughts on what we can collectively do to make sure that clean cooking is seen as a good climate solution with appropriate carbon financing through RBF facilities and the like.
Right. No, well done. I mean, I think that I agree that's a tremendous report, and it really does highlight so much of what has gone well and certainly the opportunities. I think I would have to say the clean cooking sector has been one of the beneficiaries of the carbon markets in demonstrating in particular that it is possible to track, to monitor, to quantify the benefits of clean cooking and the savings and the reduced emissions. So I think that it's just the scale, and the scale is a commitment that we have to make that work. And I think, unlike in, for example, the forestry sector, we're still trying to convince people that it is a sector that is worth making, a carbon market around that is global. This sector, I think, is much further ahead. So I would say, Dymphna, it is a scale, it is largely underfunded, and you cannot have large scale projects if it's this underfunded. And Secretary Clinton, you mentioned we have to make this important for not only climate, for development. We will not meet our sustainable development goals if we don't meet this one. This is about energy, it's about poverty, it's about environment. It cuts across so many of the development goals. And then, of course, you have the big climate agenda. We have to cut our emissions globally. And this is one area where the developing world, even though we are so considered low emitters, this is an emission sector that is killing people. And so we have to put our energy on this as well. So it is a crucial one for this decade of action. So I do not see us, if we're serious, and certainly the systems strategy will work. And I love that you're working with Sustainable Energy for All and looking at this as an entire system strategy, the NDC agenda. How do we bring that in so that it is a national policy agenda as well? Those will be crucial elements of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've really found fascinating in the last maybe 6 months or so is the ability that we now have to bring other organizations, as you were saying, Secretary Clinton, global organizations into this conversation. And so, for example, we are now regularly speaking with the World Trade Organization, with IMF, with UNICEF, with unlikely organizations that previously would not have thought about clean cooking as an issue for them to consider, because in a way it's maturing and it allows us to reach a different kind of audiences, including the International Energy Agency. Like, it's a different space right now that clean cooking is moving into that is really exciting, and I think sets us up for some tremendous progress in the next 10 years, including really the connection between the role that electricity has and clean cooking at a household level, and to no longer separate those out. It's like an artificial separation, a siloing of energy needs for families that hasn't helped us at all. And so we're really encouraged to see that show up increasingly when we meet and talk with our partners across the world. So I am personally really encouraged about the next 10 years, and I hope both of you are. And yes, indeed, I will read my own reports very carefully, Secretary Clinton, to make sure that we follow through on those. But I am just really so honored to have spent time with both of you. I'm conscious that we're getting close to having to wrap up. So with your permission, I was wondering if you think about the audience here, like maybe one other thing that you would encourage our viewers to do as they've listened to this conversation, as they internalize this important issue, and that it is possible to collectively address that. Secretary Clinton, anything you would share with our audiences as what they can do after this conversation?
Well, I think you've heard from all of us that there are actions each and every one of you can take. You can make your interest in clean cooking known to elected officials, to government leaders, to the heads of corporations. However you can communicate that through letters, online, in any way that is available to you. I think going online and talking about this conversation, raising the visibility of the importance of clean cooking to the environment, to our fight against climate change, to empowering women, to ending deforestation, to helping people live healthier lives, to ending unnecessary deaths. I mean, this is such a complicated but rich problem for you to help us address. And then, of course, if you are inventive, study the different kinds of models that are being produced about clean cooking. Maybe you've got a better idea. Maybe you could come up with something that would make a difference. So I just hope that people will use their voices, use their shared experiences, use their level of commitment to contribute, to support in whatever way possible the work of the Clean Cooking Alliance and all the work it's doing around the world to deliver clean cooking to hundreds of millions of more families, so that the 400 million we've done the last 10 years becomes, a billion in the next 10 years, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Secretary Clinton. Wanjira.
Wow, Secretary Clinton has mentioned crucial pieces, and I want to build on the one she said about education. One of the things that the Wanjira Mathai Foundation does is work with young people and inspire young people to be responsive, to be attentive to what their community needs and what their communities need. And that we must see, Africa is largely a young continent. Apparently, the average age of Africans today is 19 years old. Can you believe that? So there are a lot of young people who are going through our education system. And as they do that, is our educators to begin to make this an agenda for young people to be attentive to begin to respond to how we cook in our homes and how we begin to inspire them into careers in engineering and in others that will begin to touch on this issue from an early age, that we begin to sensitize young people to see, because half the time people just don't see this as a problem. I'm one of those examples. I was in it and I didn't necessarily see it as a problem. And to see it as a problem when you're in it is to be very responsive and thoughtful, because you won't eliminate the parts you like. You'll come up with solutions that incorporate what you like about the cooking arrangements that we have. And I think that way we'll have true transformation. And so, how do we build a system where young people begin to be introduced to this from an early age? I think this is going to be a real transformative change.
Yes, absolutely, Wanjira. I think you and I should talk about a potential partnership with UNICEF to do exactly that. So I will follow up with you afterwards. As we wrap up, the Clean Cooking Alliance recently launched an award-winning social media campaign that is focused on making sure that all our partners and everybody in our ecosystem is increasingly aware of the issue of clean cooking. It's called Clean Cooking Is. And so if that is okay, Secretary Clinton, can I ask you to finish the sentence, clean cooking is, and then Wanjira, if you could do the same, that would be fantastic.
Oh, there's so much to choose from. Clean cooking is empowering women and girls.
Wanjira?
Clean cooking is a life and death situation. Address it now.
Great. Well, thank you both so very much. It's been just an honor and a pleasure to spend time with both of you today. Thank you for the audience for listening. And please reach out, obviously, to the Clean Cooking Alliance if you do want to get involved, if you do want to get engaged or engage with us on this critically important issue. And as I said, for both of you, continue to be inspired. And I look forward to 10 more years of wonderful impact as we collectively make sure that no one's life is limited by how they cook. So thank you both.
Thank you so much. Dymphna, Wanjira, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dymphna. Thank you, Secretary Clinton.